What's up, friends? Welcome to Leaders, Letters, and Legacy alongside Dr. Marianne Calle. I'm your co-host, Scott Fussell, and we are thrilled you decided to tap play and spend some time with us today. We'd love it if you would consider Leaders, Letters, and Legacy a verbal archive for many of the stories and the people who have shaped the fraternity sorority movement for the past 2+ centuries. It's time we shine a light on leaders. It's time we help them write a love letter about their letters. It's time we talk about the legacy we want to leave behind. It is time for another episode of Leaders, Letters, and Legacy. Let's go. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the chapter meeting. After every episode, Marianne and I sit down. We have a conversation about the guest we just had on the pod and some of the lessons we learned from that conversation. So today we're excited to come back and talk about our good friend Dan Shaver. He's a member of Sigma Chi's board. He is a leader and a legend in the business side of fraternity and sorority and in the community in general. My God, what an incredible conversation we had with Dan. Left it totally inspired with just a new appreciation for him and the work that he does and why he's been successful. Mac, what were some of your big takeaways?
Well, I've been a fan of Dan's for years and years, and he really has, as if you've listened to the podcast, he's helped us as organizations understand how to own our marks, how to own our brands. But the man behind the business is that he is truly a Sigma Chi who lives by Sigma Chi's principles. And so, when I think about what he shared with us, I have not been able to get it out of my head, Scott. This whole concept of mimicking behavior. He talked about how people mimic bad behavior. And we know that, right? We talk about it. We try to solve for it. We see it show up, whether it's in hazing or behavior and alcohol and all the things that we know can take us down a path that's dangerous, right? And very quickly. But he talked about how that same mimicking behavior can create a culture of good, right? Where if I mimic your behavior and you're truly showing up to be the brother that or sister that you said you were going to be, that can be mimicked as well. And I love that part of it. For me, that's kind of sat with me to say, okay, if that's the case, why are we focusing so much on the negative behavior that we need to why are we focusing on that positive behavior and creating that culture a little bit differently?
Well, a couple things I'd add to that is, how can I behave in such a way that I'm worthy of being mimicked was one of my big takeaways from the psychology of that phrase. But to answer your question, though, I think it is so easy for us to focus on the negativity when the good stuff out there so vastly outweighs the negativity that we see. We talked about it in our conversation with Lori Hart, which I will get to into another chapter meeting. I've got in one of my slides in one of my presentations. It's a white screen with a little purple dot. Ask, what do you see? I see a purple dot, Scott. Okay, well, which part of the screen is more representative of the good stuff you see in your chapter members? It's all the white space, but the purple dot is what you saw. The purple dot is what gets all of our attention, all of our focus. And way too often, that's the negativity that gets our energy. There's all this white space that we could be focused on that deserves to be spoken into and deserves to be mimicked. But we choose to really talk about what we see in that purple dot.
Absolutely. And my friend, TJ Sullivan, has been a thought leader in this industry and an example for a long time. In his book, Motivating the Middle, he talks about how we give so much of our power to that lower part of our organization, right? The ones that are performing at the minimal or not at all. Instead, why wouldn't we want with that middle ground, that middle percentage, right? Focusing on mimicking the behavior of those young leaders and those advisors and the professionals who work with them on college campuses. So I think the more that I was thinking about Dan's philosophy around mimicking behavior to create good culture, positive culture, for me, that's a place where I think we could all dig in a little bit. Really, whether it's programming or whether it's training or whether it's education, how do we do that in a little bit different way so that we're not, because students get tired of, especially all of us do, if you're
Sure.
constantly beaten up about the things you're not doing well. We've talked
Yep.
about that a little bit. How do we help them to see the good? And it's like when you and I are watching someone present on a stage, right? We look and we're like, oh my gosh, that was so effective. The audience responded in
Yeah.
such a way. Lori uses clapping as part of her way. I use music. You have a schlick at the beginning. We've mimicked that from someone.
Hmm.
We saw it work for them. Maybe that's it, right? It's when you see it work for someone, you're like, but that can be good or bad. And
Yeah.
so let's start shifting that conversation to mimicking the positive behaviors,
Yeah.
and creating some change that way.
Yeah. And well, acknowledging the positive behaviors so they're more likely to be mimicked. Let's shine a light on the good stuff so we can be more likely to mimic that behavior. One of the things that I think that when we talk about let our behavior be worthy of being mimicked, one of the things that I think that was so impactful from our conversation with Dan was he talked about one of the things that has made his business so successful, one of the cornerstones of the way he does business is this emphasis of principle over profit. When you're thinking about the business community and a business practice and just the way you do business, I can't think of anything more worthy of being mimicked than walking that principle out in the way you do business, the way you work with people, the way you lead people, et cetera. What were your thoughts on that particular piece when he shared it?
He lives it. I'll give an example. I was speaking at a conference a couple of summers ago, and I look up and there's Dan. I had no idea you were going to be here. He says, I wasn't supposed to be here. I said, well, then why'd you come? He says, I wanted to see you. And I was like, I mean, it was one of those moments. And I mean, he lives in California. I live in Louisiana. Conference was in Indianapolis. And so you're kind of like, he shows up. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
Dan Shaver's word is built upon his integrity. If if Dan tells you he's going to follow through, and again he shoots it to you in a way that I think he doesn't try to make the business, he doesn't try to make your what you need while you're coming to him fit into a model that he has, right? So that he can obtain your business. He does it in a way that it's of service to the customer. And I think that's how he's built this industry of, there's the dog.
Sometimes they show up in chapter meetings.
I know they
It's
do
okay.
show up. I think he's built a business on the fact that people trust him to negotiate contracts. People trust him. Sorry about the dog.
It's okay.
People trust him to negotiate. And when there's a lawsuit, Dan's leading all of that work. If someone's abused at UPS, he doesn't really like Brown. He doesn't like when Brown delivers
Yeah.
a
Hey,
package.
focus on the white space. He's been quiet this whole time, and you're focused on the purple dot right now.
I got you. But I think to me that's
Yeah, I think one of the things that I loved about what he shared and why one of the outcomes of this principle over profit philosophy that he sort of does business by is, and you mentioned a minute ago, just the word trust. To me, that is, especially in this industry, this community,
yeah.
trust is the currency. Trust is the currency. And we talk about, gosh, you lose it in buckets and you gain it in drips. And, one of the reasons why he's been so successful is because he's not trustworthy part of the time. He's trustworthy all of the time. So I think that's just such an important trait that he exemplifies and he models. It got me thinking. I went to a statue unveiling recently of Senator Richard Lugar, and Condoleezza Rice was there speaking. She talked about one of the reasons he was so effective as a senator is because he was trustworthy, he was trusted, and he was trusting. And you talk about a kind of jaw on the floor moment. Just all the different iterations of trust and how it's reciprocal, and you've got to extend it, but you also have to be worthy of it. And it was just really fascinating how she described those three variations of the word trust in describing Senator Lugar. And I think that's one of the things, if we wanted to talk about Dan Shaver, we could use all three of those words to describe him as well.
But
Closing
the other
thoughts.
thing I was going to
Closing
say
thoughts.
before we leave, Dan started his company, Affinity, early on when our industry didn't really have our own, we didn't have vendors, right? And so Dan was much younger, walking into these spaces, and he had to create trust with folks who might have been older than he was and more established. But I love the action part of those words of trust that you just talked about.
Yeah.
That's what I got from Dan, is that Dan doesn't just talk about it, he lives it. And what a better example for all of us, whether you're a fraternity member, sorority member, or you are just stopping in to visit and learn a little bit. Please go look up our friend Dan Shaver. He also works with all different kinds of other industries, but he's really helped us to be able to protect what was established by young college students, and sometimes even younger than that. Dan's been able to help us keep the integrity of those organizations through time. So grateful that he was our guest and that we were able to spend this time in our chapter meeting, really just talking about him. And for those of you who don't know what chapter meeting is, it's a meeting we have once a week. Our organizations are supposed to set aside. It's supposed to be sacred time where we talk about the business, we share brotherhood and sisterhood, and hopefully we learn a little bit from one another. So, Scott, this has been a great chapter meeting. I appreciate you showing up and having this conversation with me.
Well, it's great to listen and learn from you, as well as our friend Dan Shaver. Thanks so much for Tap and Play, spending some time with us today. We will see you next time. Today's show was hosted by Dr. Marianne Calais and Scott Pucell. For more information, please follow the show on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. You can also follow Dr. Mac and Scott on social or on the web at mariannecalais.com and scottpucellcoaching.com. Thanks again for tapping play and joining us for another episode of Leaders, Letters, and Legacy. This has been a Find Your People production.